Good afternoon,
Hello.
and welcome to this bilingual session with Chinese writer JIANG Fangzhou, who is, as we just heard, um, joining us live from Beijing today. And I've brought back up, my name is Petra Thiel, Johanna Wittheim, who will read some passages from her latest short story collection, A Walk with the Only Man Who Knows Why the Stars Shine. The readings will be in German, so it's a bilingual session. The short story collection is not yet available in any European language, as far as I'm informed, so the translations are made by us. A warm welcome to everybody here at Frankfurt Book Fair and at home. I will just dive into the story in order that you get an idea about what Jiang is writing about. Her latest short story collection, as we've heard just now, has been published in 2020 during the pandemic. In this short story with a rather long title, 和我已知道星星为什么会发光的人一起散步, which translates in English, A Walk with the Only Man Who Knows Why the Stars Shine, is a story which is dealing with a nameless woman who lives in a country and time that both remain uncertain. The story begins with an encounter by surprise. One day, the female narrator accidentally runs into her college friend Fu Xie, whom she hasn't seen for quite a while. He looks aged and haggard. They both sit down in a cafe and start talking and reminiscing about their past. Fu Xie used to be kind of a drifter, whereas she, the female narrator, was facing a future as a scientist and astronomer. One of her favorite pastimes was watching the stars, hence the title. Everything changed, however, from one day to the next. A virus hit the city, people died, conflicts evolved, a war broke out. Fu Xie and the female narrator survive. However, they follow different life paths. We learn that she marries rather for rational than romantic reasons, and that Fu Xie was able to leave the city when the virus hit, before the great lockdown was closing all the city borders. This journey into the past is interrupted several times, and we suddenly find ourselves in a different world, in a parallel world set in a parallel galaxy. A new voice starts speaking, which turns out to be a computer-controlled being, which is observing what he or she is calling a primitive planet. We suppose it's Earth, or at least it must be the planet where Fu Xie and the female narrator live. Other computerized beings communicate with each other. They live in different planets. We learn that there is a huge planet which has some infrastructure projects going on and who is subjugating the smaller ones. Stars are dying. This faraway universe seems threatened, as is the primitive planet where Fu Xie and the female narrator live on. And yet, above all, there's always the question of what life is all about. I will now start talking with our author for today, for this session, JIANG Fangzhou, live from Beijing. In order to
Hello.
get to know her a bit better, and in order to get to know what her writing and her life is all about. Hi, Fangzhou, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, nice to see you.
I'm glad that the internet connection is stable. It's quite late already in
Yeah.
Beijing. We
Yeah.
just heard that you started writing at a very early age. You were 9 years old when your first book was published. You've been publishing ever since, mostly short stories. My introducing question to you would be, when did you realize you were a writer? When did you say, writing is my profession? I am a writer.
Yeah, I began my first book when I was 7, actually before 7. It was one afternoon, and my mother lied to me, said there is a law in China. Every child should publish one book before graduate from primary school. Otherwise, they will be caught and in jail. So, because of scary, I began to write my first book. But I really decided to be a professional writer is actually when I turned 30. It's like 2 years ago. I remember in my 30th birthday, I told myself, now you are a middle aged woman. You have to face the limitation of possibility and time, and you have to decide whether writing is only a hobby or a lifelong career. So that's when I realized that writing is the only thing I can enjoy and never be tired of.
I see. Well, feminism and female empowerment. I mean, your mother asked you to write in order to empower you
Yeah,
too, and
yeah,
having to fight for your rights as a woman, as a female artist, seems to run like a thread through both your personal life and your writing. So, what interests us as readers of your literature is. Um, how do you describe the role of the female in your texts, in your short stories and novels?
yeah. I think there are two parts of the female identity for me. As a woman in life, I faced a lot of difficulties. So I participated in the Me Too movement years ago to speak out the unfairness for the women. But as a writer, I found myself used to avoid the female identity. I often write as a man's voice because I used to think to speak as a woman will make me seem weak, a lack of ambitions, and a lack of writing technique. So I began to wonder why. So I think part of the reason is from my mother. She was an unsuccessful writer, published one autobiography, and never wrote again. So I used to attribute her failure to feminism. I thought she was too much rely on her personal experiences as a woman. So I want to be the opposite of her. I want to write something that is far away from me and from my female identity. I think only in recent years I found that kind of idea is really wrong and is a betrayal of my sex and my heart. I have to be honest with my life and the importance of women's personal experiences is no less than a war or a country's destiny.
In your latest short story collection, which you wrote
Yeah.
2020 during the pandemic, you chose a very special genre. You chose the genre of speculative fiction, whereas some critics and journalists in China always would refer to it as science fiction literature. You insist that it's speculative one. So, what
Yeah.
are the speculative parts within this short story, especially in the short story A Walk with the Only Man Who Knows Why the Stars Shine? Because that's quite interesting. You have a certain twist in your stories.
Yeah, yeah. I learned the idea of speculative fiction is from the great novelist Margaret Atwood. She is a great Canadian female writer, and she said her novel is not science fiction, is not fantasy fiction, but speculative fiction. Speculative fiction is a way of dealing with possibilities that are inherent in our society now, but have not been fully enacted. So, like Margaret's work, The Handmaid's Tale, it was written in 80s or 90s, but became popular in recent years. And I wrote the story A Walk with the Only Man Who Knows Why the Stars Shine in last years when I was very depressed by the pandemic and I began to think what if the pandemic goes on for like 10 years or even 20 years and what the world will become. And another question is that I'm the generation who benefit from globalization, and I'm wondering, will I witness the end of it? So I thought that kind of questions last year and began to write a story. So I wrote about the female scientist whose life is totally changed by a long, seems never end pandemic, and what happens next.
As we have talked about you yourself, your writing, and about this very special and particular short story, I would suggest to just listen to a few passages from this story. And I would like to ask Johanna to read out one scene when the virus hit the city and when the female protagonist and her high school friend, college friend Fuxie, when their life suddenly is hit by this tragedy, actually. Please, Johanna.
Während dieser Zeit der Schulschließungen verbrachten wir unsere Tage damit, neue Leute kennenzulernen, Partys zu feiern und uns zu verlieben. Mehrmals traf ich betrunkene Studenten an, die sich auf dem Rückweg vom Labor zum Wohnheim am Straßenrand erbrachen. Immer weniger Leute gingen in die Bibliothek und ins Labor. Erst Jahre später wurde mir klar, dass in dem Moment, als die Party endete und die Musik aufhörte zu spielen, alle plötzlich die Angst überfiel. So wie einen Passagier auf einem Flug durch die Galaxie, der zufällig aus dem Fenster blickt und bemerkt, dass das Heck des Raumschiffs in Flammen steht. Am 18. Tag der Schulschließung liefen meine Klassenlehrerin und ich den Flur im Vorlesungsgebäude entlang. Der Geruch von Desinfektionsmitteln ließ uns schneller gehen, und ich erzählte ihr aufgeregt von den Ergebnissen meines gestrigen Experiments. Sie lachte auf und meinte: „Du arbeitest immer noch so viel." Da wurde mir klar, dass das alles keinen Sinn mehr hatte. Molekularformeln, Noten, Wissen, das mit einer Schleife verzierte Abschlusszeugnis, auf das ich hinarbeitete, die kalten, glänzenden Metallinstrumente im Labor, ein Leben voller Verdienst und Fleiß. Alles dahin. Als die Angst auf dem Campus immer spürbarer wurde, starb Herr Lang von der Wirtschaftswissenschaftlichen Fakultät. Er brach plötzlich in der Cafeteria zusammen, als er in der Schlange zur Essensausgabe stand, krampfte und war innerhalb von 10 Sekunden tot. Seine Frau starb ebenfalls 2 Tage später, gemeinsam mit dem noch ungeborenen Kind in ihrem Leib. Herr Lang war ein kleiner Mann mit einem weichen Gesicht gewesen, der jeden neuen Schüler mit der gleichen Eröffnungsrede begrüßte. Sie sollten besser etwas Wirtschaft studieren, bevor sie heiraten, damit sie mit minimalen Kosten maximales Glück erreichen können. Immer wenn er diesen Spruch losließ, wurde er rot und lachte über sich selbst. Ich habe die Leiche von Herrn Lang nicht gesehen. Angeblich war sie entstellt und aufgedunsen gewesen und sah ganz anders aus, als wir Herrn Lang kannten. Seine sterblichen Überreste wurden eilig verbrannt, um die Ausbreitung des Virus zu verhindern. Seine Beerdigungsfeier fand in der Schulaula statt. Ein Pult wurde in einer Ecke der großen Bühne aufgestellt, in der auch Herrn Langs lange Kleidung und seine Vorlesungsunterlagen lagen, versiegelt in eine Plastikfolie. Die Trauerredner saßen in einer anderen Ecke. Die Mitte der Bühne blieb leer. So fand der Tod Eingang in unser Leben. Nur 10 Tage nach der Beerdigung verwandelte sich die Schulaula in eine Leichenhalle.
Yeah, life is getting difficult and even tragedies happen. When Teacher Lang dies, that is just the very beginning of the whole pandemic. And you were writing this story last year when you yourself were in a lockdown, in a very tight lockdown. Since many people can relate to this situation, as we are all facing this kind of situation still, I was wondering, was it planned to write about a pandemic, or did the stories you were writing last year eventually evolve into pandemic dystopias?
Yeah, actually, it was planted. Like I said, I was very depressed last year. One of my relatives is affected with COVID-19, and I cannot see my family in 6 or 7 months because of the lockdown. But I suffered most from the loneliness. The face-to-face communication became so luxury, and we get used to that so easily, even lie to ourselves that online talk is enough. So I realized that I'm in a very special period in human history, and some human experiences may be changed forever. So I think I have to remember this kind of feeling because I know we are so good at forgetting things. So I think in March in 2020, I began to write and finished in July to remember this kind of feeling to write about how people first talk about the pandemic, talk about their sorrow about death, then they become numb and forgetting all this. So I think it's very interesting because when I write, I found the reality and the fiction almost happened neck to neck. For example, I wrote about the racist history in the city. And the next week, I saw the news about the chaos in uh, Minneapolis, in America, I think. So I told myself I have to write really fast before the reality catch up with my imagination.
Luckily, your imagination still remained an imagination when we go further into the story, because a really great war breaks out. And
Yeah.
we all suddenly realize what can happen if nations decide to be secluded from others.
Yeah.
And I would like ask Johanna to read out a passage where you really describe the situation, the claustrophobic, the situation being in a separate world where not only a pandemic brings everything into chaos, but also a great war. Johanna, please.
Der Krieg überfiel unsere Welt wie eine Pandemie. Das Radio im Haus war schon lange abgestellt worden und mein Mann las nur noch Zeitungen und Zeitschriften. Die Zeitungen waren jeden Tag voll von Nachrichten über Kriege zwischen den Ländern. Die Gründe für diese Kriege waren alle seltsam und an den Haaren herbeigezogen. Verbündete und Gegner wurden scheinbar wahllos ausgetauscht. Der letzte große Krieg hatte vor einem halben Jahrhundert stattgefunden. In den Geschichtsbüchern hieß es, dass dieser Krieg der ultimative Showdown zwischen Gut und Böse gewesen sei. Diesmal war die Situation eine ganz andere. Wir erlebten keinen großen Krieg, sondern zahlreiche kleine, miteinander verknüpfte Kriege, die alle gleichzeitig stattfanden. Jeder dieser kleinen Kriege hatte sein eigenes Gut und Böse. Ich blätterte in den Zeitungen, die mein Mann gelesen hatte, und versuchte mir die Brutalität der Schlachtfelder anhand der Schwarz-Weiß-Fotos vorzustellen. Dünne Kinder, die fast nackt vor dem Feuer wegrannten. Verwahrloste Teenager, die misstrauisch in die Kamera blickten, mit Gewehren fast so groß wie sie selbst. Junge Mädchen, die sich hinunterbeugten, um einen blutenden Jungen zu küssen, der auf dem Boden lag. Ein Flugzeug, das auf einen Marktplatz stürzte, ein Kloster, das in Schutt und Asche lag, das berühmte verloren geglaubte Gemälde im Museum, das von wütenden Teenagern mit Taschenmessern in Stücke geschlitzt wurde. In mir stieg ein Gefühl von Unwirklichkeit hoch, so als betrachtete ich Szenen, die aus einem Film stammten. Es ist wie in der Hölle, sagte mein Mann und blickte auf die Zeitung. Ich erwiderte: Musst du Zeitung lesen, um zu wissen, dass wir in der Hölle leben? Als ich heute draußen war, traf ich meine frühere Nachbarin aus dem Gebäude, in dem ich wohnte, bevor wir heirateten. Sie war einmal ein sehr hübsches Mädchen gewesen, das immer wieder für Maler Modell stand. Aber als ich sie heute sah, sah sie ganz anders aus. Sie grub ein Loch am Straßenrand. Ihre Haare hingen im Dreck. Und als ich sie fragte, was sie da mache, sagte sie, sie würde ihr Baby begraben. Sie sagte, kein Krankenhaus habe ihr Baby entbinden wollen, weil sie mit einem Akzent sprach, wie jemand aus M. Dabei kommt sie aus einem ganz anderen Land, das keinen Konflikt mit uns hat, aber niemand ist da gewesen, der dies auch bezeugen konnte. Sie brachte ihr Kind später allein bei sich zu Hause zur Welt. Der Säugling starb noch bei der Geburt. Solche Geschichten liest man nicht in den Zeitungen. Mein Mann sah mich mit schmerzverzogener Miene an, sagte aber kein Wort. Nach einer Weile wandte er seinen Blick wieder der Zeitung zu und meinte, die Welt beginnt zu brennen. Rationskarten wurden zur harten Währung. Schwarzmärkte bildeten sich in der gesamten Stadt. Die Menschen tauschten alles, was sie hatten, gegen alles, was sie bekommen konnten. Von Nahrung, Medizin, Benzin bis hin zu Informationen, Waffen, Leichen. Es war eine dunkle Zeit, an die ich mich nicht erinnern möchte. Eine Zeit, in der jede Nacht hagere, halb verhungerte Frauen durch die Straßen zogen und vor Kälte zitterten, während sie von den Menschen am Straßenrand mit funkelnden Augen angeblitzt wurden. Das Einzige, was in dieser stillen Stadt unter dem trostlosen Himmel noch lebendig schien, waren die vom Mondlicht beleuchteten Bronzestatuen der Helden der Vergangenheit, mit ihren hoch erhobenen Häuptern so, als trügen sie falsche Masken, ohne einen Hauch von Mitgefühl für all das Leid, das sich vor ihren Augen abspielte.
Yeah, the situation is getting really dark, and at the same time, we hear that at this parallel galaxy, life is not getting better any longer either. So my question to you would be, here we heard what is happening on this primitive planet, but we always get a glimpse into what's happening on the other planets who are observing this primitive planet, where Fuxie and the female narrator are struggling for surviving this pandemic and the Great War. Why did you create those two worlds? Why did you create two perspectives on one of the same thing?
Yeah, I set two viewing angle. One is a female scientist observe the circumstances around her, like the pandemic, like the war. Then other is this like mega computer observe the universe. I have these two sightings because I have developed one hobby from last year. I will look up at the stars and the moon at night, every night. Part of the reason is I feel so helpless. I hope there is a God behind the sky to end the pandemic. Another reason is because the stars make me feel so small and make all the encounters, all the depressing news seem so irrelevant. I think that kind of thought make me feel comfortable, make me feel warm because I think, make me feel hopeful because I think all the pain will pass. And when I look at the star, I found them so generous. The stars shine no matter they have or have not audience, and the lights of the star traveled hundreds and thousand years before people can see that. So I think it kind of like a writer's work. They create their work with or without readers. Maybe the readers is in hundreds or thousand years after. But the moment a writer began to write, they are not lonely. They are not lonely anymore because someone will see the writer's work to and understand their thought and begin to create their own imaginary work. So, like the title, I think to read a story is like take a walk with a writer at night to walk with the only man who knows why the stars shine. So that's why I created two words. One is the cruel and unfair reality, and the other imaginary word stands for the power of writing, stands for comfort, and stands for eternity. Yeah.
So it's all about power and empowerment again.
Yeah.
When you wrote the short story Der Regenmacher, the Rainmaker, we haven't talked about this yet, and this is just a
Yeah.
short intermission, since this is the only short story which is available in German.
Yeah.
You write in this story. You're writing about a female artist who's married to a Japanese man. She moves to Japan, and all of a sudden feels very, very lonely and lost. She finds herself as a housewife. She's taking care of the child, and she loses her identity as an artist. In the
Yeah.
other story we heard just now, A Walk with the Only Man Who Knows Why the Stars Shine, it's actually a woman who knows why the stars shine. It's this unknown female narrator who is nameless, and her favorite pastime is looking at the stars. But even she, while married, is kind of losing this interest for the stars. So,
Yeah.
what is your message, so to speak, as a writer? Not losing your imagination, not losing what you really fought for all your life. Stick to what you what you love?
Maybe just too scary to get married. I don't know. I think yeah, it's about losing losing the ability and losing talent, because this is the most scary thing for me, to lose my talent. I was some kind of like genius child when I was 9, so that kind of talent become a burden for me, because I'm so afraid of losing it one day. So I think I read all this kind of women who became um, maybe mediocre after they get married, is because uh, my own frighten of getting married and lose all my talent.
I guess you will not lose your talent. We haven't talked about one of your mentors in your life. It's JIANG Fangzhou, one of
Yeah.
the most prominent voices in contemporary Chinese prose. So, did he tell you something about not giving up on your own style and not giving up on in believing in yourself as a female writer in China?
Yeah, I think the best advice he gave to me is to never be self censored. Yeah, because he is a very brave writer who write whatever he wants, and no matter of the censorship. So I think what I learned from him is that the braveness. I hope I learned the braveness from him.
The story A Walk with the Only Man Who Knows Why the Stars Shine ends with an open ending. It's very sad and it's at the same time quite empowering. Again, I have to say empowering because this is really a thread that runs through your writing. And maybe we hear a part of the ending of the story. And I would like to ask Johanna to give us a glimpse how the story could or might end. It's not the real ending, but it's just shortly before the story will end.
Weißt du was, Fuchsia? Du gehst gerade mit der einzigen Person spazieren, die weiß, warum die Sterne leuchten, sagte ich. Was? Fuchsia kümmerte sich nicht um meine Frage. Nichts. Ich lächelte. Sprich mit mir, Fuchsia. Er sagte, ich habe an dich gedacht. Ich erwiderte, ich auch. Fuchsia fuhr fort. Es kommt mir vor, als ob wir in diesem Leben nicht sehr nahe stünden. Du sagst nie, was du wirklich denkst. Und ich bin zu schlecht im Raten. Aber das scheint keine Rolle zu spielen. Jetzt, da wir uns wieder getroffen haben, also sollten wir uns nicht zu sehr über unser Schicksal beschweren. Ich forderte ihn auf. Erzähl mir mehr. Und Fuchsia sprach, ich habe zwar viel erlebt, aber ich habe das Gefühl, dass ich nur wenige Tage in meinem Leben wirklich gelebt habe. Den Rest der Zeit habe ich wie ein Zuschauer verbracht. Ich erwiderte, ich auch, Fuchsia. Erzähl weiter. Er fuhr fort. Ich dachte immer, dass die Menschen ein Leben lang lieben könnten. Aber inzwischen ist mir klar geworden, dass das nicht der Fall ist. Die Liebe hat Grenzen. Manche Menschen begreifen das früh und geben ein wenig Liebe nach der anderen aus, sparen sie für jeden Menschen, den sie treffen. Aber ich war zu dumm. Ich habe zu viel verschwendet, als ich jung war, habe meine ganze Liebe zu früh ausgegeben und jetzt bin ich ganz kaputt. Nein, so ist es nicht. Fuchsia, sag noch etwas. Sag, dass es noch nicht zu spät ist. Fuchsia hörte auf zu reden. Er sah mich an, aber sein Blick ging durch mich hindurch zu einem fernen Ort. Es war, als wollte er all die Geschichten durchschauen, die ich im Laufe der Jahre erlebt hatte. Und mit jeder weiteren Sekunde, die sein Blick verweilte, spürte ich, dass all der Schmerz, die Freude und die Sehnsucht, die ich in den letzten 20 Jahren empfunden hatte, langsam zerbrach und verschwand. Alles zerbricht und verschwindet. Das ist nichts, wovor man sich fürchten muss. Wir sind alle aus Sternenstaub der Vergangenheit gemacht. Und weil wir alle ausgelöscht sind, werden wir zu neuen Blumen, neuem Staub und neuen Sternen. Fuchsia war bereits auseinandergebrochen. Ich bat ihn, mehr zu sagen, aber er wurde immer undeutlicher und verschwand schließlich endgültig.
Thank you, JIANG Fangzhou, for sharing these beautiful worlds and these sad worlds and these tragedies with us. I look very much forward to welcoming you sometimes in Germany. I hope so.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.